happens if you've got the Emirati supporting one side of this, but then that's also being a bit of a problem for the Russian Ministry of Defense and Kremlin? How does that work going forward?
It's a question of priority. We can ask ourselves why what Russia is seeking in Sudan, and I think one of the main things that they are seeking is to have a naval base in the port, but they can have it with the Sudanese army controlling the coast, and they can accept that Sudan is separated right now, and you have de facto two states in Sudan right now. And if the situation is not changing, maybe they would be interested to have also some relation with the paramilitary, the rapid support forces, and they don't want to compromise their presence in Central African Republic just for that. But Wagner is also aware that the Central African Republic is struggling with its finance, and so the United Arab Emirates partnership with the Central African Authority will obviously prevent the country from financial collapse.
This is The Global Gambit.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Global Gambit, where we focus often on Russia-Ukraine, as those who are returning will know. But one area that I have a lot of passion for and actually lived for a bit of time is Africa. Now, Africa is obviously a big continent, not a country, so some of you might be interested to know where exactly. Well, it was in the east and a bit in the west, but a lot of work was still done on the center because it all interrelates through the center, through the Sahel. And we've had a few interesting conversations about Russia's influences in, say, Mali, or their lack of, and the deteriorating situation. But the Russians have actually been even more influential or present for a longer period of time, one could argue, through countries like Chad or CAR, the Central African Republic, as well. Indeed, in one of those countries, I'll let you guys guess which, has a statue dedicated to a certain Wagner group, which is absolutely hilarious, but also kind of disturbing at the same time. But as the situation for Moscow continues to deteriorate over Ukraine's long-range and deep strikes, one wonders, how much can Russia continue to exert influence across other parts of this world, in other spheres, let alone its own sphere of influence, its own near abroad? And we've got just the person to do that with, Charles Bouëssel, who is the senior analyst on the Central African Republic for International Crisis Group, somewhere that I was also part of for a period of time. And, well, he's, how to say, Charles, you're an expert on sort of Central Africa more broadly, but you've looked at Russian paramilitary operations, the Wagner Group, and now Africa. And some of you who remember earlier in the year, I did a deep dive about Africa and how the whole thing is sort of disintegrating. Indeed, I think the time I reached out to Charles was around about the time that the Wagner Group had lost a couple of critical settlements in and around parts of Mali. But Charles, it's good to have you on the program. I'm quite interested to understand, just as a sort of overview, how is the situation for Russia in this part of Africa? Is it all deteriorating, or it's more complicated than that?
Well, in the Central African Republic, we have a very specific situation because Wagner has managed to remain in the country and to prevent Africa Corps from coming until today, which makes Central African Republic, I think, now the only country in Africa where Africa Corps has not managed to replace Wagner. And you still have the head of Wagner in Central African Republic, who are still people who were close to Prigozhin. The head have not changed, and the men has not changed. And as you said, they have a statue of Yevgeny Prigozhin in the center of Bangui, and they are still doing ceremony around this statue until today, which make the country in this very specific situation, and which is making the relationship with Russia pretty complicated right now, because Russia is not happy with this situation, but they don't have the means or the will to replace them. They fear that they could lose everything if they try to go more violently in this change. And so we are in this peculiar situation.
Wait, so if I understand correctly, you're saying that a breakaway fragment of the Wagner Group still exists, a splinter cell, so to speak, still exists? Even though I thought the organization was incorporated or wrapped up into the MOD, a couple of years ago after the attempted mutiny?
Exactly. So, for instance, it's still Pavel Prigozhin, the son of Prigozhin, who still own all the economic asset of Russia, Wagner Group in the Central African Republic. Russia has tried several times to replace them. They have sent several times emissary of Africa Corps to try to replace Wagner. But Wagner is so deeply entrenched in the country that they manage to resist, and they can rely on the Central African authorities, who fear that they would lose because they see that Africa Corps is less proactive on the military side. And Africa Corps also is asking for payment, monthly payment, which are huge. Those payments would represent 10% of the state budget, and Central African Republic can't afford that at all. And so each time Africa Corps has tried to do this change, the Central African authorities has delayed it with arguing that they can't afford it, and that maybe Africa Corps could come and work alongside Wagner, which is not an option for Russia, apparently. And so we are still in this situation. The last time Russia has tried to do so was last January, but it failed until now. And I think Russia is dealing with this problem like they dealt with the Wagner problem generally, which is not to create an open confrontation, not to show their division openly. And so maybe they will try to weaken them slowly, but until now, we still have a Dimitri City and another guy, which nickname is Salem, and those guys were close to Prigozhin, and they are still heading the Wagner Group until now.
I find this it's even more bizarre than I thought it was, Charles. So just to understand, so you've got this Wagner entrenchment in Kar that looks really like a symbolism of how lack of control Moscow has on its whole African policy at this, or has it created an instrument it can no longer fully command? How does Russia try to leverage Africa to deal with this, or it can't? Because the situation in Mali, let alone this one you've just described, how does this all?
Well, I think we can explain it because first, Wagner has a huge influence in the Central African Republic that they didn't have in Mali. For instance, Wagner is doing the presidential security, and they have even issued threats against the president if he would remove them. And the president and his cycle are afraid to remove them because they are afraid that Wagner may do a coup and may replace them with another politician. The name of Firmin Grebada, a former prime minister who was close to Wagner, is often quoted as a man close to Wagner who could replace Touadéra in case of a coup. This is a fear that really exists among the presidential cycle, and this is one explanation of why the Central African authorities have not expelled them. Another explanation is that the Central African authorities and Wagner shared common economic interests in some gold mine and all that. And so they may be afraid of losing all the money flow which come from those interests. For instance, Wagner is running one of the biggest gold mine of the country in Dashima. They are sharing the profit with some of the person within the presidential cycle. Another third explanation is that Wagner has acquired a deep knowledge of the ecosystem of armed groups in the country. And this knowledge could not be taken by Africa Corps like that because it's not in a book. It's informed. Wagner is using a lot of proxy armed groups that they have hired to work with them. They have a lot of company with strawmen, and all this ecosystem is really existing only in the head of the Wagner, but not in any books or else. And so if they were to cut the hierarchy of Wagner, they would lose all this knowledge, and they would absolutely not be as efficient as Wagner. And Wagner is also aware that Africa Corps is less proactive on the military side. And so they are playing this card, doing a lot of military operation every month, even enduring casualty every month, attacking rebel outposts. And they are showing to President Touadéra that he can't replace them.
From my limited studies of this, the Wagner Group seem to implement a model of extraction, right? It's an extractive model. So they take gold, diamonds, timber in exchange for what? Protecting authorities, regime protection. That's been their core proposition, at least in Kar, if I understand correctly. How sustainable is that? And is it replicable elsewhere, or is it particularly beneficial and effective in Kar? which is why they remain there compared to like for Coring and Mali?
I think it's maybe not replicable. CAR is very specific. As I said, the level of influence that they have helps them not to pay taxes, not to show any of their profit to the CAR authorities. The CAR authorities have no clue what Wagner is extracting in terms of gold, diamond, timber. And so their place to be as powerful as the state and to be able to oppose the state in certain cases makes the operation very profitable. It's rough estimation, but we have estimated that Wagner operational cost may be around 15 million per month in Central African Republic and $15 million per month. And they are earning at least this amount, even more, especially thanks to Ndashima gold mine. But they have also, and it's a good example of how powerful they have at one point even taken control of some custom office at the border of the country, and they were collecting the tax for themselves, evicting the custom forces and taking the border and collecting the tax. Obviously, they are not paying any taxes. They are not referring to anyone what they are gaining. And so, it makes the operation pretty profitable. And this is also another reason why they want to stay there. And Pavel Prigozhin, the son of Prigozhin, is traveling often to the country to see that his economic assets are still in place.
So what does this tell us about the state of Russia's ability to project power then? I think the framing is very much that the local leaders, African leaders like Touadéra, are very passive recipients of a Russian, patronage. But is there actually more agency? Is it that they do have more influence over what Russia can and can't do? Or in the case of Carr and Wagner, it is pretty one-sided?
I think that, Touadéra has traveled to Moscow several times over the last month. So the CAR authorities still want to keep a good relation with Russia, even if this problem is endangering this relation. And I think Russia is careful of acting too more violently against Wagner, because Wagner, in the end, is still helping Russian influence in the country. And Wagner is not acting against Russian influence. And so maybe Wagner is hoping that Russia will say at one point, okay, we can't replace them. Let's keep them because they are still useful in the end. And they can play a card that Africa Corps can't play anymore, which is the plausible deniability, doing some stuff while Russia can deny it. And for instance, we have some information right now that Wagner is helping to convey weapons delivered by the United Arab Emirates to Sudan from Central African Republic. And as you know, Russia has now aligned with the Sudanese Army. And so Wagner is helping the other side. And maybe Russia see it as a way to keep a foot in the door of the paramilitaries, the Sudanese paramilitaries, while denying it, or while being able to deny it in front of the Sudanese army.
So if I understand correctly, they are supporting the Rapid Support Forces, exactly. The RSF. Okay. Because we've covered Sudan and the civil war quite a few times, and for people, they should be aware that Sudan has the spillover effect significantly to Kar and the other parts of the southwest of Sudan. Darfur, I think, borders the northeastern part of Central African Republic. So they are connected. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the UAE, because we've covered obviously extensively the war in Iran, and the UAE being one of the biggest exporters of arms, but also now its own sort of influences in the Greater Horn of Africa and everywhere. It's really interesting to see that they're also active down here. But to bring in another side, which is the French, because the French have been kicked out of Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger most recently. So that's an extraordinary collapse of positioning what was the point force in this multinational grouping in the west of Africa. Is Russia actually filling that vacuum now, or are they just overreading how much the Russians have been able to improve the relations relative to the French?
Well, this is another aspect where Wagner is still playing the Russian card influence, is that since 2021, I would say 2022, after being kicked out, the French have tried to reconnect with the country and to repair the broken relation with the Central African Republic. And Russia, the Wagner Group has tried to sabotage this renewal of relation with France every time. Maybe the last time was the visit last month or 2 months ago of the French foreign minister to Car. And just when he arrived in Car, Wagner arrested a French humanitarian just to sabotage the arrival of the minister and to create a diplomatic crisis with France. They have tried to do so with a certain success, even if France has also changed its way of engaging with the country. Before 2021, France was vocal to criticize Wagner in the country, and now France is restraining itself from criticizing openly the presence of Wagner. For instance, you will see at the UN Security Council when you have a meeting about Car. Before that, France was criticizing Wagner as a very noxious force in the country, as the US and as the UK, and now only the US and the UK are still criticizing Wagner, and France is not saying anything. And so maybe they have tried to repair in some point those relationship, even if the influence of France in the country is really, really weak. But they have resumed military training in Gabon for Central African officers, and they have resumed a little part of their financial support by doing some loans and giving some money to support the administration. And I think France is trying to find a room, and they have understood that they can't go in the security field because Wagner is very jealous in the security field and the mining field. But there are other areas where they can exist in the country, and they are trying to do so. And Wagner may be less aggressive since they have changed their strategy.
Yeah, I'm curious a little bit how this also bleeds into the broader European dynamics, because we've seen a shift in Europe's collective approach towards, say, humanitarian migration. There's a growing emphasis by southern European states led by Meloni and the likes to try to stem the flow of irregular migration. And I'm just kind of curious how, in the context of Central Africa, how has the EU as a whole, has France been mainly leading the sort of efforts because of its post-colonial relations, or is there a separate approach from the EU as well as the United States? To be fair, I don't think the Trump administration really cares too much about this part of the world, but just more interested in the collective West approach.
Well, Central African Republic is not really connected to migration to Europe. Is too far, and it's like a country where the population is only 6 million people, so it's really low. But I think it's more about all the money which was invested in Central African Republic to repair the state after the crisis, the 2013 crisis. The European Union has invested a lot of money. The UN peacekeeping mission is also costing a lot of money. And I think the common stance now is that, yes, there is problem with President Touadéra, with Wagner, but there is no alternative. And nobody wants to see this country collapse again, because it would cost much more money and it would erase all the money that was invested before. And so everybody agreed that Touadéra is the only alternative that they have right now. And in the end, it's not as bad as they fear it would be, because the country is still functioning and the state authority is expanding, even if it's still very weak. It's expanding outside of the capital. The army has taken back most of the main cities in the country since 2021, partly thanks to Wagner. We have to admit it, even if it was at the cost of a huge human rights violation. And so they agree that they have to support this administration and this country, and they have to support the army and the extension of the state authorities. And I think the US is also acknowledging that, even if Trump wants to say that the UN peacekeeping mission is costing too much money. They didn't cut the mission in last November, even if there was some fear about that. But they see that you had a presidential election last December, just after the mandate renewal, which was in November. And so they agreed to renew it for 1 year without cutting any peacekeepers. And so now the big interrogation is, will the US continue to fund the mission for the next year? the new mandate will be renewed next November. And I think Central African Republic is trying to seduce the authorities, and they have just signed an agreement with the US so that the US can deport migrants to Bangui, which is kind of crazy because Central African Republic is still a very weak country at war, but the first migrants have arrived in the capital in Bangui 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so I think with this kind of transactional deal, they hope that they will have the support of the United States so that the mission will not be cancelled or delayed.
Now, there is another country that is surprisingly absent from this, considering everywhere else that it has a heavy influence, and that's, of course, China. It's very actively influential and economically present across the continent elsewhere. I was in Malawi just a month ago. I've been in Namibia last year. Been to several countries around the continent, and China is omnipresent in varying extents, but they are there. The Central African Republic, though, never really hear much of them being there. Is it a case that they sort of tacitly, quietly leave this to the Russians to take the risk, and they benefit through, I don't know, buying Russian products or the Russian-Chinese relationship, et cetera, or is there a sort of division of labor, so to speak, between Moscow and Beijing in terms of who engages which bit of the continent?
I think it was more a competition that Wagner kind of won because in 2018, China offered like a big deal, and they proposed Central African Republic to deliver huge quantity of weapons to the country through a public-private Chinese society called Polytechnology. And Polytechnology was also, they wanted to exploit oil field in the north of the country, in Boromata. And so you had all this trial to deliver those weapons, but the UN Security Council refused to leave the embargo, because you had an embargo on weapons on the Central African Republic. And so China didn't manage to deliver those weapons. And then the oil field, it was in an area where you have a lot of armed groups, and so it was very difficult to start the exploitation. But after that, parallel to that, you have still today, but less than before, a lot of Chinese company exploiting gold, especially in the west of the country. But it's like a semi-industrial scale exploitation. It's not like big corporation. It's really small Chinese company and Chinese businessmen who are also present in Cameroon, and they are exploiting those gold mines. But all this is very shady. Most of the time, they just have an exploration permit, but they are exploiting with that. They are not respecting any of the rules, and they are not paying taxes. Basically, they are paying some people to exploit it informally. But the Chinese company have tried to expand to the center of the country, and they have met the competition with Wagner at this point. And a lot of Chinese mines were attacked, sometimes most of the time by rebel groups. But some of my sources told me that some of those rebel groups were activated by Wagner to attack those Chinese mines and to prevent them from entering the center of the country, where they estimate that the gold belong to them, and that it was a promise done by the Central African authorities to give them the gold in this area. And so you had a lot of several gold mine run by the Chinese which were attacked. And so the Chinese embassy issued a statement saying that they were calling for all their citizens, the Chinese citizens, to leave the country because it was too dangerous for them. Some of them stayed, obviously. You still have a lot of Chinese gold mine in the West, but it's not as big as before. And we can say that they kind of lose some influence, partly because of Wagner, yeah.
So to circle back to UAE, because the Russians and Emiratis have an interesting relationship. I don't know whether to say that it's good or bad. It's functional. What happens if you've got the Emiratis supporting one side of this, but then that's also being a bit of a problem for the Russian Ministry of Defense and Kremlin? How does that work going forward?
I think it's a question of priority. We can ask ourselves what Russia is seeking in Sudan, and I think one of the main things that they are seeking is to have a naval base.
It's the port, isn't it?
In the port.
Yeah.
But they can have it with the Sudanese army controlling the coast, and they can accept that Sudan is separated right now, and you have de facto two states in Sudan right now. And if the situation is not changing, maybe they would be interested to have also some relation with the the rapid support forces. And I think that the Sudanese army to reconquer all the countries maybe not a priority for them, and they don't want to compromise their presence in Central African Republic just for that. Wagner is also aware that the Central African Republic is struggling with its finance, and so the United Arab Emirates partnership with the Central African Authority will obviously prevent the country from financial collapse, because Central African authorities even have trouble to pay the army, which is a big problem and a big danger even for Wagner presence and Russia presence in the country. And so I think they can accommodate with that. Speaking of Wagner had a lot of shared interest with the United Arab Emirates, because some of their company are located in Dubai, because a lot of the gold they are exploiting in Kar is exported to Dubai, and because they need sometimes, even if they pay themselves in kind, we know that there is also a small amount of the money paid to Wagner, which is paid directly by the treasury. And so to know that the treasury will be able to pay them is maybe more important than to see that the UAE is supporting the rapid support forces. And we have to say also that Wagner was present in Sudan from 2017 to 2023, especially in Darfur, and so they still had good contact there, and I think they can accommodate this situation and prioritizing what they want. And so even if it can look strange to see an ally supporting an enemy of Russia. It can work like that, I think. Yeah.
All right. And so I guess simply in the broader context of everything happening in the world, Charles, Kar has been called the sort of laboratory for Russian influence in Africa. Is this experiment going well? And can we say that Russia is winning? And what can we expect the direction to go for them, considering everything else happening in Ukraine, the loss of influences in the Middle East? Is this just a bit of a sunk cost for Russia at this point?
Well, it's a good question. And in fact, Kar was or still is a laboratory, because Wagner arrived it was one of the first countries in French-speaking Africa where Wagner arrived. And all the solution that they deployed in Kar appeared in the other country where they arrived. And at the beginning, it was very efficient, because they managed to kick out the French pretty easily, and they managed to build a security architecture which was at least efficient to protect the authorities. And I think it's one of the main aspects of it. It's not to pacify a country; it's just to protect the president, his cycle, and to extract wealth in exchange of it. So in this way, it's kind of still a success, because Touadéra is still in power, but we are also seeing the limits of that, because Wagner is still a low-cost security partner, and I think maybe the countries who expelled the French to welcome Wagner didn't realize that at the beginning. They thought that they would have all the power of Russia helping them, but Wagner is a very low-cost security partnership. For instance, in Kar, they have deployed fighter jets, which are more than 50 years old. They have deployed armored vehicles, which were from the 70s and which are all broken now. They only have between 1,000 and 2,000 men with not big equipment like assault rifle. So it's really low cost. It's sufficient in Kar because the rebels are not well equipped, and because you also have the UN peacekeeping mission, which is doing its part. I think maybe the most critical part of what they brought was the spying system, all the intelligence knowledge that they brought, which helped them to prevent a lot of internal coup inside Bangui, and to spy on the army, to spy on officers who are not happy with that. But as I said, we are seeing the limits today, because it's low cost, they have to rely on proxy armed groups to help them doing the security. And we are seeing that this strategy may work for a few months, but we are seeing, for instance, in the southeast that they train and they equipped a militia called the AAKG. And now the AAKG have decided to turn their weapon against Wagner, and it's creating a lot of problem to Wagner in this region because they are not able to pay them. They are doing promises that they can't fulfill. This is one point. Another point is that in the Central African Army, there is a huge miscontent against Wagner because Wagner is acting very badly against them. They are beating some soldiers. They are above all the grade. Even they can give order to generals, to all the officers. You have been some case of rape against soldiers, some assassination against soldiers. And so the soldiers are really afraid of Wagner. At the beginning, they were just afraid, but now we are seeing more and more incident. For instance, last week, you had fighting between the army and Wagner in the southeast. So you can imagine like the Central African Army fighting against Wagner. And the situation is not, is still going on like as of today. And so, yeah, I think all their misconduct is starting really to piss off the Central African Army, even if they are still afraid. But it's not a big. It really raises a question of how long they will be able to do that. Because if they can't rely on the army anymore, it's going to be very complicated for them to do something.
Yeah, but doesn't that effectively mean that the Russians could try to take over the country just bluntly if they want to be in control, and you've got them actually fighting the sovereign forces of Kar? Like, what does that mean?
Maybe it would push the Central African authorities to decide to kick them out. There is a big question about will they be able to do so? Because as I told you, even if it's not true, the Central African authority really fear that in case they would replace Wagner would organize an internal coup against Touadéra, and it would be very easy for them because they are like doing his security. They could use poison or stuff like that to make it appear like just else accident, and then they have sufficient leverage and knowledge about all the political world to know who to place and how to replace Touadéra without it appearing like a coup. And so I think this fear that you have among the authorities is playing for Wagner. And as I said, you still have also some financial common interest between them. But it will not help their case to see that. And despite that, Wagner is still also doing a lot of military operation, as I said, against rebel outposts. And we are seeing in Mali that Africa Corps is less proactive in the security field, partly because they have to report to the Russian Ministry of Defense and to wait for their approval for each operation. And so they are losing a lot of flexibility. So, the other question is that Africa Corps is asking for financial payment that basically Central African Republic would not be able to pay. 10% of the state budget is just something they can't afford.
Well, on that precarious and unpredictable note, Charles, it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone for watching, of course, do check out Charles's work. You can find it over at the International Crisis Group. Do check out their work more broadly. It's one of the, I think, best organizations in this industry, in this sector. And be sure to subscribe if you are new, but you find conversations like these bringing together various areas. Perhaps you're more focused on Russia, but now you understand how it operates and what's actually going on in Africa, somewhere that you might not have given enough consideration of. And of course, like the video if you enjoyed it. But we'll see you all next time. Take care.